Today, it's a return to the authentic interview where I interview a business leader. It's an interview with Boomer Muth, how you respond to a mistake as a leader. Do you have a new manager who is realizing that managing their team is different from what they thought it would be? Now, going from manager to leader is simple, but it's not easy. The Authentic Leader Show is the podcast for leaders of managers as they transform their new manager into authentic leaders of teams. I recently brought back the authentic interview after more than 5 years. This interview is recorded in front of a live audience who had just finished lunch, and you'll probably hear them in the background. The lunch was at Independence Golf Clubhouse. We had just a terrific audience, and I'm so glad you'll be able to hear this interview now. Since the last Authentic Interview live event 5 years ago, I actually had turned those first interviews into this podcast that you're listening to right now, the Authentic Leader Show. And I've interviewed 70 additional people on top of that. If you're listening to this podcast on YouTube, you'll see photos taken by our event photographer, Kim Brundage. I couldn't be more excited to be working with Kim, and these photos are absolutely fantastic. Her business is Kim Brundage Photography. I encourage you to check her out. She's received several awards over the last several years, one of which is the Best of Richmond for 5 years running, the Best of Richmond Photography. Her photos are all over my website, and you'll see them all over my social media as well. And it's truly changed the way that I brand myself. Not only is she a photographer of events, but her personal and corporate branding photography expertise, it's just simply a natural partnership for this event that we do each quarter. I encourage you to check out her Facebook, her Instagram, and her website as well. Well, let's introduce you to our business leader interview today. It's Boomer Muth. He is the CEO and co-founder of Koalafi. He has held executive roles in risk, sales, operations, the presidency role, and now his current role as the CEO of Koalafi. Before founding Koalafi, Boomer founded and successfully sold a senior home care company. For nearly a decade, he had experience at Capital One. He also had analytical leadership roles at Progressive Insurance and has a degree in mechanical engineering from Virginia Tech. Go Hokies. Additionally, he's a musician. He's actually a fantastic singer and a guitar player. Koalafi has partnerships with local and national Fortune 100 retailers. They have had rapid growth and has been acknowledged by Deloitte. Forbes has also identified them as one of the best startup employers. Now, for this interview, Boomer did not know the questions that I asked him. Here are some of the questions that I did ask, and here are some of the topics that we do talk about in this interview. We talk about Boomer's first management experience. We also talk about Boomer's leadership style and how it's really directed by a code that he lives by. We also talk about how his aspirations to be a rock star led to his eventual start of a business and, of course, now his CEO role. Boomer also shares about why your business should not be a family. We also get a little bit into how Boomer uses AI and how AI affects your cognitive load. I additionally share my story, which was one of my very biggest failures when providing my services. And it all happened at Koalafi. Well, let's get right into this interview right now. The first thing I'd like to start off with, Boomer, is to ask you about your first management experience. If you can remember when you very first had your first manager role, what was that experience like for you?
Well, are you asking my first management experience or leadership experience?
Well, that's a really good distinction. The one thing I say when it comes to management is a role, right? It's something that you get hired into a specific role and you are assigned a position where you are a manager. Now, a leader, I say you don't have to be in a role, right? You can choose to lead at any point. I kind of call that distinction. I think at this point, for this question, we're asking about an official manager role that you have been recently given. Or not recently, but in the early days.
The first management opportunity I had was actually lifeguarding at a pool.
Oh, I was a lifeguard as well.
Yeah. And so I was, I think 16. And actually, I'll share the story of how I learned a lot through this experience, because I was given the management responsibility after making a really big mistake. And I got to learn early about how you respond to mistakes is the best way to show whether you're responsible or not. So it was July 4th, and I was just one of many lifeguards. And on July 4th, everybody's there, right? And the pool's crowded, and we put extra lifeguards on the stand. And in my section of the pool, a girl jumped in. I didn't even see it, and it was my responsibility. And she was struggling. Luckily, the parent eventually saw it, and the parent got the kid out before I even knew what happened. The ultimate failure as a lifeguard. And, I just remember that feeling of, wow, I let everybody down, and how bad this could have been. And for some reason, I just chose, I said to our owner, I said, I want to pull all the lifeguards together. And I pulled all of them together, and I said, I want to ensure that none of us ever make this mistake again. I failed us, and I said, let's get together and let's figure out how we make sure nothing like this ever happens again, because this could have been really bad. And I apologized. And the strange thing was, a week later, the manager at the pool came to me and he goes, I want you to lead all the lifeguards. And it was just this shock and surprise. I went from making the biggest mistake that could possibly be made to, hey, we want to put you in charge. And from that moment on, I think one of the most powerful lessons I learned is, when you make a mistake, you lean in on that mistake. Mm-hmm. You don't hide from it. You don't run from it. And I'm just so thankful I got that lesson to be able to learn that. So that was my first experience managing. I think you were probably asking not how I got it, but how I handled it.
Yeah.
I don't remember a lot about how I handled it as a manager. I remember more about, getting assigned it. Yeah. But I felt like everybody respected me. It was nice. And I think the thing that helped was I always showed I was willing to jump in. So I didn't really change my relationship with anybody. I just said, I'm going to keep doing the same things. All I'm really doing is helping us organize things. And I think I realized too quickly at a young age that people responded well to that. Mm-hmm. Of you don't assert authority. You don't go over here and say, well, now you guys do this and I do this thing over here. So I don't know. Does that answer your question?
It does. What I love about that is that you started answering about you in your first manager role, or how you became a manager, but you did it through leadership. No one told you that this is how you're supposed to handle this. You somehow, where did you get the idea that, I need to just get these lifeguards together, and that feels like the right thing to do?
Probably my parents. Mm-hmm. They didn't tell me how to handle the situation, but I think through example. My dad he had a temper, and so he'd lose his temper, but whenever he lost his temper, I remember he always came to me and apologized for it. Mm-hmm. And so before we went to bed, there was always a hug. There was always responsibility for that action. Yeah. And instead of it making me resent him, it made me love him. And so I think just that example probably helped me a lot. Saying, hey, if you mess up, say it. Yeah. And so a reminder for all of us as parents probably too is that's going to be your most important example.
Yeah. One of the things that I find, especially with new managers or new leaders, is that they sometimes get frustrated in their first new role because they've seen so many examples of these natural-born leaders. Do you consider yourself a natural-born leader? And if not, how did you really develop your management skills?
I spend the majority of my learning in leadership. So I don't know how much I believe. Now, obviously, I had the gift of parenting. Mm-hmm. So I think my parents I was very fortunate to have parents that were intentional around how they wanted to raise me and teach me a bit about leadership at a young age. But that learning just never ends. I still have so much to learn. I imagine if we have this interview 5 years from now, I'll have a totally different perspective if I do this the right way. But most of my learning, most everything I touch is about leadership, because leadership is the way to, one, also just help everybody to be their best selves, which for me is the most powerful purpose in life. is helping other people realize their full potential. But not only that, but it's the way to make impact. It's through a large organism of people and helping them point towards the right direction. What more powerful contribution can you make to society than that? And so if in any way I can learn how to be a more inspiring leader, a more thoughtful partner to every human being around me, I just don't think you can invest more in that.
Yeah.
And so I guess the short answer is I was fortunate with my parenting, but I've leaned in on it.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't ever anything where I said, oh, I've got this. It's more like, oh, I realize this is really, it'd be great to lean in here.
Yeah. You know, when you share that story, I find that the clients I'm most successful with are those who recognize that they're not done. And I love working with those leaders who, like, even if they're really, really good, they recognize they still have a ways to go. There's still something more to learn. So perhaps we will have you back in 5 years and we'll see how much you've learned since then, right? Yeah. How would you describe your leadership style?
How about I just tell you a bit of the code that I live by?
Yeah.
And that might help with the style. And I think I shared this with you recently, Chris. Mm-hmm. A Harvard professor in early 2000, he built an equation, and he did it based on tons of research on people that are considered the most trusted people. And he built a very simple equation that defines what trust looks like. And I have not found a flaw in it. The equation, just so you guys know it, is trust equals reliability. So you're going to do what you say you're going to do. You're going to set clear expectations and deliver on those. Plus credibility. So you know what you're talking about. You're curious about learning. Plus intimacy. And that intimacy is around the vulnerability. Are you truly learning about the people around you? Are you admitting when you make a mistake? And then you take that whole thing and you divide it by self-orientation. So remember, when you divide something, the denominator, as it goes up, the trust goes down. Mm-hmm. So the more you focus on yourself, and the more you focus on what you want, the less likely you can build trust with those around you. And so that bottom one is so important. And so I try in everything. It's hard. We all have egos, right? We all have these things we think we want. But my goal for myself, and I got to say goal because it would be ignorant to say that I always hit on it, is that I focus mostly on what will help us and what will help the individuals that I'm partnered with. Mm-hmm. And I found that when you lean in heavily on that, you get really great things. Mm-hmm. And so that trust equation has kind of become the code of how I think about every interaction. And I think when it comes to leadership, that means make sure that you deliver on the promises you set, right? And be really thoughtful about what promises you make. And so if you don't know, say you don't know. If you're not sure on the direction, say, I'm not sure about this. Obviously, you want to be able to give answers, but sometimes it's okay for the people that are following you not to know all the answers because they can be part of the solution. And then that reliability, if you say you're going to be there. Show them you're willing to get in the trenches with them. And then learn a little bit about them. On the intimacy side, tell them a little bit about yourselves. Tell them about your mistakes. And learn about their life. Try to figure out who they are, how they've gotten to where they are. Just recently, and this wasn't my idea, was inspired by others. With every leader on our leadership team, we're asking each other, tell me your life story. How did you get to where you're at right now? And you'll just find like humanizing each other builds so much more trust. Because mistrust is usually you thinking the other person wants something different than you. Really, you just disagree about how to get there. So if you align and say, hey, I believe you want to get here. I want to get here. And usually it's the same spot. And then you can actually problem solve together in a much less defensive posture. So it's reminding about those shared goals. And that's a good way to get rid of that self-orientation.
Yeah. That's super good. That sounds tweetable about just understanding that you're both trying to get the same goal. You just have disagreement about how to get there. So align to that, right?
And usually you're defensive because you think the other person wants something different than you.
Yeah.
So if you create this shared pool of meaning, this shared meaning of we want this together, gosh, those challenges become much more easy to conquer.
Be willing to have the conversation as well. A lot of people will avoid having the conversation because they've made this assumption, like this is not going to be a fun conversation. I'd rather not have it. Well, you never know what you might discover, right?
Yeah.
Just by having the conversation to find out.
It's a great way to disarm on the front end.
Yeah, I feel like I have to share just a very quick story of my first lifeguard job.
Okay, yeah.
And just very briefly is that he also was, the pool manager was willing to get his hands dirty, right, and get in there because we were there to show up on the very first day to get the pool ready. The pool wasn't open yet. He said be there at 8 o'clock. So we get there at 8 o'clock. We found out he was there at 6, scrubbing toilets, taking out trash, doing all the really terrible jobs that no one really wants to do. So when he says, hey, we need someone to go like scrub down the shower floors, how can you argue with that, right? Because he's willing to do it too.
That's a great example.
Yeah, one of the best bosses I ever worked for was my first job as a lifeguard.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's good. Did you always aspire to start a business and then become the CEO of that business?
No, I didn't actually.
So how'd you get there?
Yeah, I aspired to be a rock star.
Oh, of course. Me too.
I think what I really learned at a young age, and here's another thing I was fortunate on, is at the age of 14, I had a close friend who was also a dreamer. And we got really into the Beatles. And we started getting into Pink Floyd too. We were just listening to this music and watching the Beatles movies. And we started saying, we could do this, right? It wasn't scary. It was like, we could do this. We could be the next Beatles. And so we said, well, let's start a band. We didn't know how to play instruments.
Oh, really? We'll worry about that later. Right?
So we started recruiting band members before we knew how to play instruments. And we went across social groups. We actually recruited one of the popular kids to come in on this dream. And the four of us together, we started a band. We learned our instruments together. We started really learning together. And I think I realized at that age, between 14 and 16, if you believe big, you'll start seeing solutions of how you get there. Mm-hmm. And so the smaller your belief, the smaller the solutions that you look for. Yeah. The bigger your belief, the more likely you find solutions. Yeah. And so we just learned how to play instruments, and we had a dream to follow. And so at that age, I just learned that I love being on teams. And I think we have a bit of a challenge in society and how we raise kids right now, because particularly if they play single person sports, we're teaching them in school and in individual life that life is a zero-sum game, right? There's going to be a winner. There's going to be a loser. And so I think not intentionally, we sometimes get in this scenario where we think, well, if I win, you lose. And I think having that gift of knowing we're together as a band, we make a product together. Mm-hmm. And the quality of that product is dependent on each of us as individuals building a stronger product. Just helped me early learn that it's an infinite sum game. We've got the goal wrong in life. In life, we can all win, every single one of us. And actually, if one of us wins, it's more likely the other one's going to win too, because we'll see what's possible together. Long-winded way to answer your question. Right. But I think for me, I just realized I want to be a part of a great team. And so I think being a part of a great team has just driven me through everything. And actually, I was CEO when we started the company. My business partner is brilliant, a great strategic thinker, and has much more experience than me. So when we got the company to a certain size, he jumped in as the CEO. And over the last 5 years, he said, hey, listen, I'm ready for something else. I wasn't saying, well, I want the CEO role. It was more like he said, hey, I just think it makes sense for you to do it. So long-winded way to say, no, my goal wasn't CEO. My real goal is, how does Koalafi create the most valuable and powerful results possible? Yeah. And if that's the seat that I'm in, great. Yeah. And I want everybody to hold me accountable to that. Because if you can in this room, great. But certainly the people at the company. If I'm missing the mark, then I'm not in the right seat.
Yeah.
And I think that right person, right seat is really important.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, sometimes I feel like some of the best leaders are those who are reluctant leaders, right? Like, I'm not looking out for this. I'm not trying to become the leader necessarily, but sometimes if you're doing the right things, you end up being where you're supposed to be. And that's what I kind of hear you saying in your story there too. Koalafi has...
And by the way, for now, right? Like, we as leaders...
Oh, true.
I think one mistake we often make at companies is we start thinking it's a family, right? And I think the mistake of the family is your family, you're going to love everybody no matter what, and they're not going to leave your family. On a team, your goal is the best team possible.
Yeah.
And it's a living organism that goes on way after you're there. You can be really proud for the role you played when you played it on that team. And so that's one of the hardest things as leaders too, right? Is often you'll see that this person was so great and played such a powerful role in getting you to where you are. And one of the hardest things is saying that's part of your memory. But if we want a really great team, we have to get ego aside.
Yeah.
We have to say, here's what we need right now.
Yeah.
And I know it sounds ruthless, but you can do that with empathy. Often if that person isn't in the right seat at the right time, the best gift you can give is, hey, you got to change. Because humans don't want to change. We're going to keep doing the same stuff we don't really like doing unless somebody tells you can't do it anymore. And for me, I wouldn't be sitting here telling you about Koalafi if Capital One hadn't laid me off 9 years ago. They should have. I wasn't passionate about what I was doing. I wasn't about to leave. They had to tell me I didn't belong there. And that forced me to say, what do I really want out of life? And so I've gotten to go through it enough times at Koalafi for the growth over the last 9 years to see that every single person that we said, hey, it's time to move on or do something else, I can't say every single, but I think probably 95%, they're in a better position for them right now because of that move. So it's actually more human to say the team is better without you than it is to say the team is better with you if they're not.
Yeah. Speaking of your fast growth, because you guys have had exceptionally fast growth, certainly in the first several years of the business, but it continues to happen now. What has been your experience in dealing with that fast growth in your leadership roles?
I think it's been a little bit of what I told you.
Yeah.
We've been through a lot of different stages at the company, and this is something I always try to inspect in myself because I really like the scrappy part of building a company. I love it. I mean, in the beginning, I drove up and down Broad Street and I sold our first 150 dealers, a product we hadn't even built yet. And I answered every single dealer and customer phone call for 6 months. I loved that part. I loved touching all of it. I loved figuring the whole thing, how it fits together. But I can't be that same person that I was then and do those same things now and be an effective leader because it wouldn't allow me to delegate, wouldn't allow me to let other people fail. So I often think in my head, well, can I be someone that's good at both of those things? And that's the part of the self-doubt that you have a little bit is saying, well, am I doing these right things? And that's part of why I leaned in on learning about leadership. It's why I'm always reading some book about leadership because I know the team needs me to be this right now. And so that's what I'm leaning in on. Now, not everybody can be a generalist, right? Not everybody can wear multiple hats, and that's totally fine, right? There's no right person. And I think it's important to say, well, gosh, you were the person that helped us get from, 20 employees to 40 employees. You're not the person to help us get from 200 plus. And that's probably been the part of our growth that's been the most interesting, is that if you're growing really fast, that can change really quickly. In less than a year, a person can do great work, and all of a sudden they're not the right person for the next role. So from a leadership perspective, that's been challenging, but exciting too.
Yeah.
I think that it helps you recruit. When you're growing really fast, it helps you recruit people that really like discomfort. Because growth is uncomfortable.
Yeah, right.
You can't grow without discomfort, right? And so if people are excited by that growth, it means innately they're excited by discomfort. And so I think that's an exciting place to be able to recruit people like that.
Yeah. You mentioned delegating work to others, and you talked about letting people fail. And I sometimes call that like strategic delegation. Can you share with me like your strategy when it comes to delegating?
It's, I want to be really clear, it's something I'm still trying to improve on.
That's what all good leaders say, by the way. Seriously, you're still always trying to, because no one's perfected this, I don't think, right?
No,
you're always improving,
no.
right?
And I think that there's an interesting balance. I think the best leaders, they both care deeply and they hold people to a really high standard. Now, the challenge as human beings is these are sometimes in conflict with each other. The more you care about someone, the harder it is to make them really uncomfortable. And the less you care about them, you make them really uncomfortable, but why are they going to listen to you? Why are they going to be inspired by you if they don't feel cared for? And it's a really, really hard balance. And I think it comes true in the delegation too. How do you keep them the right amount of uncomfortable? And what I try to do is push the leaders that are on our team to solve the problems. And if they can't concisely and clearly articulate the decision point to me, then I push them and say, you're not yet there. Come back to me when you can communicate it to me this way. Because I think, Mark Twain wrote a letter to somebody one time, and he said, it was a really long letter, and he said, I'm sorry, if I had more time, the letter would have been shorter.
I love that quote.
Yeah, it's
a really
great
good
one.
one.
Yeah. And I think it's so true. When you really understand something and you've thought of every angle, you can communicate it really clearly. And so I try to push every member of the team to build that strength to communicate really clearly. And if they can communicate clearly, it also allows me to be a more powerful leader, because then it takes a limited amount of time to touch this particular problem that we're solving. If I dive in too deep with them, one, am I at risk of solving this for them? And then they don't learn. And two, how much time does that take away from the ability to actually see how the whole picture fits together? Yeah. So I hope I didn't cop out on your answer, but I think that's a big part of delegation, is ensuring that you structure the relationship in a way where you say, here's my expectation and how you're going to present the next decision points along the journey. And then they do all the problem solving. Usually, if they do it right, they just come in and say, hey, here's what's happened, here's what I think we should do next. And I say, great. Yeah. I don't even need to do anything. But if they can't communicate it clearly, it makes me worried that, maybe there is more here.
Yeah. Part of what you said there, I so agree with that. As long as you're very clear about the result that needs to be produced, you shouldn't care how it's done. They may do it in a way you never even considered. It may be more effective and it may be more productive. As long as you both walk out of that conversation with being clear about the result that needs to be produced. If you get the result, I don't care how you do it.
Yeah. And the reason I said I'm still working on this is just 3 weeks ago, one of my direct reports came to me and gave me constructive feedback. He said, hey, when I come to you with certain problems, you jump immediately into problem-solving mode. And sometimes I really just wanted you to either listen, or I wanted you to provide a different type of guidance, which wasn't the solution to the problem, but how I might be able to interact with others to find the solution to the problem. And for me, it was eye-opening. And he cited a couple examples. And I said, wow, that is really true. Now, just a week earlier, another one of my direct reports said the opposite.
There's leadership for you, right?
He said, hey, you need to be much more clear around where you stand with the leadership team. Sometimes you're listening to everybody and we don't really know where you stand. And the strange part is both pieces of feedback were totally true. It all depended on that context. I think we as humans, we have this tendency towards binary. And we say, oh, well, this person said this, that, and this person said the opposite. So it's all bullshit, right? It's all bullshit, right? You have to be curious. You have to be really curious, and you have to create a culture in which your people are going to provide you feedback. When they stop providing you feedback, how are you growing? How are you being the best leader you can be? And so, and that's hard sometimes. I'm going on tangents here, Chris. Sorry.
Well, that's dangerous territory when you are not getting feedback, because that's telling you you've not created this trusting environment and culture where you can receive feedback. It's your job as the leader to create the relationships with your teams to be open and receive that feedback. So if you're not getting it, guess what? That's an alarm that needs to go off, I would say, for a leader.
Yeah.
You're in dangerous territory there.
For sure.
Yeah,
yeah.
That's good. This is maybe a tough question for you, because we've really been focusing on like new managers, new leaders, like developing your leadership. What is it that you see experienced managers are missing right now?
I'll be loose with what you're asking.
Thanks for letting me know ahead of time.
So I think that culturally, the definition of what leadership looks like is changing. And it's happening right in front of us. Yeah. And I think the pandemic probably accelerated it. I think good for me and my leadership style. Like, I think it's actually benefited me. I think we're realizing the feedback we get from our team is that they want an empathetic leadership style. But I don't think this was always the case culturally. And it's still not the case culturally in other cultures around the world. I think traditionally it was very much the leader says, this is what we're doing, and the rest of the team says, okay.
Yeah.
And I think depending on past businesses, depending on amount of experience, there are still some leaders that may lead with that style. But there's also a personality component to it too, right? So that's why I said I'm being loose with it. I hate to generalize generations, because it's not, you can't generalize everything.
Great.
But I would see that there's a tendency, who my dad was as a leader. He was always an empathetic leader, but he very often said, here's what's happening, and this is what we're going to do, right? There wasn't much, hey, what do you think we should do?
Yeah.
Right? There wasn't much bringing everybody along.
Yeah.
And I think that experienced managers may think, well, why are the things I used to, why isn't this working?
Yeah.
They say that they're going to do it, but then they don't really do it.
Yeah.
And you realize you can tell people what to do. They're going to do a much better job if they say, I think we should do this.
I call leadership a luxury. And what I mean by that is that to lead typically is helping your team come to their own conclusion. But it's a luxury. Sometimes you don't have that luxury. And you need to step in as a manager and say, this is the decision we're going to need to make. I'm going to make this because we have to make this right now. And I'm going to own it. If it's a good decision, guess what? I'm going to give all the credit to the team. If it's a bad decision, it's my decision, right? I'm going to totally own this bad decision. But I think luxury is leadership is a luxury for that reason right there.
It is.
That's
good.
Good.
There are times, but choose them wisely.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
I think that's
the
key. You choose them wisely. Like, hey, a pandemic comes, that might be a good time to say, here's what we're doing. I think decisiveness from a leader is important. Hey, a recession comes and businesses are changing drastically, and you have to make a decision today.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can't pull the team in.
Yeah.
But that's rare. I think it's so few things are both urgent and important.
What are your thoughts today, given today where we are right now, on artificial intelligence? Are you using AI? And if so, how?
I'm using AI, yes. So I use ChatGPT, particularly if I want to clean up a message. So one of my main common prompts is, if I'm going to be communicating, I actually just did it today. I sent an email to the whole organization this morning, and I had a section of it that just didn't feel quite right. I was like, it's not saying exactly what I wanted to say. So all I did is plugged in ChatGPT, and I said, clean this up a little bit. And I took the first draft. I said, that's exactly what I wanted to say. Right?
Yeah.
And why not?
Yeah.
It's my intention. Yeah. The intentions are mine. Like when you buy a greeting card, it says the thing that you wanted it to say on it, right? There's a whole business around this. Why is how you communicate to everyone else any different?
Yeah.
I was reminded by a friend, because I was talking about AI, and he reminded me that when the printing press came out, that there was all this, all of society, it was way crazier than what's going on right now. They were like, can you believe this is happening? Yeah. We can't equip people with all of this information. And if we can all read books, then what is our value, right? We can just get it out of a book. And so we're actually just talking about it at the table is it allows you to release cognitive load. If you don't have to spend your time perfecting the exact word, you don't need that cognitive load of the exact word. You can spend your time thinking about really important strategic things.
Yeah.
And now the question is, the people that are going to win now are the people that know how to use their extra time. And one of my favorite sayings is, and my trainer has it up on his wall, is it says, action comes before motivation. And this one is hard. We always forget, because for years our motivation as a human species was food, shelter. We didn't have to take action before motivation. Our motivation would come. And the more technology we get, the harder and harder it is to wait for motivation. If you guys wait for motivation, we're just going to be sitting on their couch watching TV.
Yeah.
And so we just have to take action. And so I think with AI, make sure that it's going to free up some time that you used to use and say, well, I got to do this. Yeah. But use it. Yep. Don't be afraid of it. It actually makes things a lot easier. There's no downside at all of saying, hey, clean this up.
Yeah, it takes away all that cycle time. And I've actually used it probably almost daily. It frees me up. Help me just think about what's the approach.
Yep.
That I just, and then, of course, it is still your job to edit it, right, and change and see what doesn't work or make sure it's your voice or whatever, right? But that's great. Well, thank you for sharing that story.
And one time I actually I'm not a huge AI user, but the power of it was powerful. I just had these thoughts that were going through my head around a problem I was trying to solve. And I just kind of jotted all kinds of things. I didn't think about the structure. I didn't put it in bullets. And I threw it into ChatGPT and I said, hey, send out some bullets of main points here. And it was like 5 bullets. And I was like, yeah, that's it. And then I was able to go to the team and say, hey, here is what's on my mind. Here are the things we need to solve. What do you think?
I would like to share a story here with this audience. And I know that you know this story already, Boomer, but this is the first time I've shared this story really with just about anybody, much less in a public environment like this. I've been working with Koalafi for the last couple years or so. And early on, I was brought in, actually working with your HR folks over there, who are amazing, by the way. I was brought in to do an in-house, in-person workshop, and then also a virtual workshop, right? Because you actually have managers and leaders all over the country, primarily on the East Coast, but you still have some even on the West Coast, I think, right?
Yeah, we have a distributed sales team
exactly.
throughout the country.
So the in-person one went fantastic. But for the virtual one, I remember I was fully prepared, got all online, everything. Got on, actually it's 20 minutes beforehand, I was online with the HR folks I've been working with to make sure everything works perfectly through Zoom, right? I had everything all planned, ready to go. And then at the top of the hour, people started joining. And the more people who joined, the more degradation I experienced. And it started freezing up and locking up and all that stuff. And for someone in my kind of business, I mean, nothing worse could happen, quite honestly. We had, I'm not sure the exact number, we had at least 40, maybe 60 people who were on this Zoom call. And I have an account for 100, so that should not have been the case. To make a long story short, it almost completely locked up. I had enough communication to be able to send out, everybody, let me just reboot, please stay on this Zoom call, I'll be right back. So I shut down my computer, went and got a brand new cable, thinking maybe I had a bad connection, plugged it all back in, rebooted up from a fresh start, got logged back in, started booting up. The same thing happened. Completely locked up. We basically had to cancel. And this is the worst thing I can imagine. Can you guys imagine this happening, right? And somehow I had the wherewithal to go search for your phone number because you were on the call. You actually were in the in-person one as well. He goes to many of the training programs that we do there, which is a great sign of leadership. I remember finding your phone number somehow. I called. You had no idea it was me. You didn't probably recognize the phone number, but you answered. And I just explained to you Boomer, I don't know what happened. I'm going to find out, but none of that matters. I take full responsibility for this because it is. It's my fault this happened. I should have somehow known. I later found out Zoom made a change in their software that required certain hardware requirements that I did not have. That was why it happened. But does it matter? No, it doesn't matter. So I just said, Boomer, I'm going to make this right. I'm going to fix this somehow. I'm not sure even what's causing this. Do you remember what you said to me?
I don't. What did I say?
I'll tell you what you said. You said very flatly, Chris, thank you for taking responsibility, and I will look forward to when we reschedule this. And I remember thinking first, thank goodness that Boomer was a reasonable person to say that, although I knew I had an uphill climb to rebuild my credibility, right, and my reliability, because this simply could not happen again. Guess what I got? A brand new computer. I actually ended up that was when we were moving. I was in a brand new house with a brand new internet connection. I literally had everything was replaced. And the next one went off without a hitch. It went absolutely perfectly, thank goodness.
Now, what I do remember is before you called, saying, in my head, I was like, do we have the right guy? Right? I do, but...
I didn't know you were thinking that, but I would too. You should. I would think that too.
But it changed. It changed by the way that you approached it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's so true as a leader. It's one of the best tests for your team. If you don't let them fail, you don't get to figure out who they are. Yeah. And when you took responsibility, you did what. So one of my favorite books is called "Never Split the Difference" by Chris Voss, who was an FBI hostage negotiator. I highly recommend it. Such a great book. And he has this concept of an accusation audit. If you really want to build trust, you say all the things you think the other person might possibly say negative about you. And you say it. You just put it out there. You probably think this about me. You probably think this. Now, he did a short accusation audit. He said, this probably hurts your trust with me. I don't know if those are exact words, but that's what I felt. I own this. I need to fix this. And I said, okay, well, I can't say that to you now. That's what I would have said to you. Mm-hmm. But you said it before I could have said it. And so when you do that, it actually switches into a mode where now I start trying to say, well, Chris, I get it. Stuff happens, right? Yeah. And I think we often forget, we let our egos get in the way. And we say, well, I can't admit this. No, what you do is you admit it. What is the worst thing you could possibly think about how you feel right now? Yeah. Say it. And when you do that, others will trust you. And by the way, if your team doesn't do it, they might not be the right person. And so that's my biggest test. Give them a chance to coach them. Say, here's the right way to respond to that. And if they don't do that next time, they don't belong there. Because how do you know that they're going to focus on growth if they can't be the one to say, here's how I messed up? So I think it's a great sign that you did that, Chris. I think that's exact. But you're right, because I don't even think about it now. Yeah. Because you responded to it, you took credibility, you were reliable, and you made sure it never happened again.
Well, there's a reason I haven't talked about it since then. I want some time to lapse and prove myself. We've done many programs after that, thank goodness, and they've gone off well. Thank you for that learning opportunity. Koalafi has been my biggest failure, and now maybe one of my greatest successes now is to continue to work. So you mentioned one book, right? Never Split the Difference?
Yeah.
What's another book that maybe has had the most influence on you?
Well, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I feel like I shouldn't say it, but it is. Yeah. I mean, that's just...
It's a common one, right?
I mean, human beings haven't changed that much. Yeah. Actually, I think Never Split the Difference is pretty much just a rewrite of How to Win Friends and Influence People, but just articulated in a way that I think modern society takes in. The Art of Impossible. So it's by a guy named Stephen Kotler. And he is a neuroscientist focused on the state of flow. And flow is like being in the zone in sports. And he focuses on the optimal, the highest human potential. And the reason why that's been great for me is because I don't think I ever thought about leading by helping people stay into flow, right? I didn't think about, hey, did they get enough sleep? Are they exercising, right? These are things that are so powerful. I mean, you guys know, after a good night's sleep, you think way better. Also, you're way more positive. Yeah. I mean, I just had stuff I was worried about last night. I woke up this morning, I was like, that's not hard. I can take that on, right? Yeah. And so how can your team be their best selves if you're not ensuring that they're really focused on the types of behaviors that make sure they can be in peak performance? So that book inspired me and my partner to say, okay, well, we have Oura rings. Let's subsidize Oura rings. They cost $300 a piece. We're going to cover $200 of the $300, and let's let our staff get Oura rings, right? Let's talk about mindfulness. Let's set up a group about meditation. We have a meditation room at Koalafi. These are things that are necessary to keep people in the right headspace and avoid burnout. So it's interesting that to be a peak performer, you can't just go, right? Every sports athlete knows you have to recover. And so that was probably the other book. I went off on a big tangent, but helping to understand the chemicals, the neurochemicals in human behavior have helped me a lot as a leader, because I think it helps me empathize. I can just ask questions like, hey, how are you sleeping? And that can often tell you a lot. The team probably gets annoyed because I say, why don't you try going to sleep a little bit earlier? Just see what happens, right? Which, I think traditional leadership says, well, why would you ever talk about the personal life? But if I really want to help people reach their full potential, I have to. Yeah. And show that I really care, not that I'm trying to pry.
Yeah. Well, I have one last question that I typically ask all my interviews. I'm a little reluctant to ask it only because I feel like you've been answering it throughout this entire interview here today. But the question I always ask is, what does it mean for a leader to be authentic?
Yeah, I think I kind of did answer.
So what he said is the answer.
I think it is, I think it's the two parts of, well, the big part of the equation is the intimacy part of the trust.
Yeah.
I think just don't be afraid to say, I effed up, right? Do not be afraid of that. Your fear of that is what's going to create the things you're afraid of. You have to admit you make mistakes. And there's a timid way to admit you make mistakes, and there's a confident way to admit you made mistakes. Yeah. The confident way is what Chris did, right? He called me immediately. He said, I let you down. It will not happen again. The timid way is, I messed up. I just don't know what's going on, right? And so I think that admit your mistakes, but also don't be afraid to just talk about your life, talk about some of your past mistakes, and get really curious about other people. I think curiosity is the key part of authenticity. Yeah. If you're genuinely curious about everything about another person, you don't even need to say anything about yourself. Yeah. They will feel that you're authentic. So I guess that'd probably be my short answer.
It's funny you say that. I've got all these notes and questions that are prepared to ask you here today. But what do I have here at the top of my page?
Be curious. Yeah.
Be curious, right? Yeah. Because I find that the question I need to ask you is in the answer you just gave. And you did a great job just kind of leading us through that. So let's just give a quick round of applause for Boomer for sharing his story. Thank you. Here are some of my big takeaways, and I'd love to know what stuck with you. I love the fact that Boomer shares how when making a mistake, you need to lean into your mistake and just don't hide from it. It really helps with your credibility and the trust that you earn with your team. I also love how mistrust is you thinking that the other person wants something different than you want. But in reality, don't we all really agree on probably what the goal is and what we're trying to achieve? I love the thinking big part where he talks about if you believe big, you start seeing solutions that actually will get you there. AI is really helping you to release the cognitive load on your brain, and it really helps you to take that cognitive load off so that it can do that work for you. And of course, you have to edit it and make it your own. And I think there's a lot of truth to how Boomer described AI as kind of like how the printing press disrupted our lives back when the printing press was first introduced. I love the quote that action comes from motivation. It's never the other way around. We'd like to believe it's the other way around, but it's not. And then also how technology is affecting motivation, something we probably all need to be aware of. And then lastly, of course, is why admitting your mistake is the best move as a leader that you can make to earn trust. Leadership is simple, but it's not easy. Acquiring and developing these key skills begins the transition from manager to leader of high-performing teams. I'm hired to work with new managers to develop their skills and to help them to transform into authentic leaders of teams. If you would like to help your new manager prioritize where to focus their development first, go to ChristopherRJones.com where you can access the leadership diagnostic tool for new managers. It's a simple tool with 21 questions and takes 5 or 10 minutes to complete. You'll get an immediate score and a follow-up detailed report. If you work with new managers, or perhaps you are a new manager yourself, my passion is helping new managers in their transformation to authentic leaders of high-performing teams. In December of 2023, I'm hosting the New Leader Lab workshop that I offer once per quarter. It's a 2-day workshop specifically designed for new managers. The workshop provides the tools, systems, and frameworks new managers need in their transformation to leadership. Check out newleaderlab.com to learn about the workbook that's included, along with curated books, the follow-up coaching sessions, and the small group experience that participants receive by attending the workshop. Check out newleaderlab.com today. If you can relate to anything that I shared today, or if you'd like to ask me any questions, hey, I'd love to talk with you. Put a comment right here and I'll respond. You can also DM me or reach out to me through my LinkedIn profile. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can find me at LinkedIn at I am Christopher Jones. You can find more information and other free resources when you go to ChristopherRJones.com. Thank you for joining us today. Please come back next week for another episode.